I'm joined now by William Jones, Kimberly Papillon, and Agustin Arbulu. We're ready to hear from our audience members. First question, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a retired police captain, and my question is for you since you're a journalist. One of the ways that I see that we can reduce this negativity between the police and the black community is accountability. And one of the, besides the police department being accountable and investigating itself, which, you know, that can be
yeah, you never know how
negative or positive.
Sure.
But the source that should be checking and verifying that what they are doing is correct and fair is the press. And from what I see, the press is accepting what the police department is telling them at face value and not digging deeper. Let me give you an example. Okay. This latest shooting in North Miami, I saw the news reports, and it said that the officer had one previous internal affairs investigation and he was exonerated. Well, knowing that that could be deeper, so I went onto their site, the police site, to investigate, and they had his whole file there. Well, right within the file, you could read the internal affairs case, and he should not have been exonerated. So either the journalist didn't read this that I read here in Michigan, or they read it and they didn't care or didn't understand it. Sure. So how do we deal with that?
Well, so, I mean, I can't speak for any other journalist, obviously. I can speak for myself and for the Detroit Free Press and talk to you about how much time we spend digging through what police do and do not do. The consent decree that was agreed to between the Justice Department and the Detroit Police Department that had us under federal supervision for a decade started with a series of news stories in the Detroit Free Press about the tactics that police here were using in terms of the dragnetting that was going on, the rough tactics with suspects. And so, I mean, I would say it's a priority for us to be able to try to do those things. Now, of course, we're smaller than we used to be. The business is tougher than it used to be. So the challenges to us are greater. But there's no question, and certainly as the editorial page editor and as a columnist, my bias is toward accountability for the police. I spend a lot of my time thinking and writing about how we can hold police more accountable for their behavior, not less. That doesn't mean that there aren't other journalists who are not doing as much or who may be not as well trained in trying to ferret that out. But I think locally we're not doing a horrible job with that. Next question.
I'll offer this question to anyone on the panel. I have a friend who mentored, she's a white woman, suburban, successful, mentored two African-American girls for 9 years, inner city girls. Next year they're going to graduate from high school. Rare opportunity for her to get to know them and their family and vice versa. How significant could that type of work on a large scale be in terms of a lot of the issues we're talking about, education as well as racial unity? How big of an impact could it make if, you know, here we are at Focus Hope, and it was Father Cunningham and Eleanor Jositis who came into the community and said, we're not just going to talk about it, we're going to do something about it. What if everybody said, I'm going to make a commitment of 2 hours a week to do something about it?
William, I'll let you, or whoever, jump in.
I'll give it a try. I think it's wonderful that people get out there in various communities and take the time to work with our youth. I think that's great on one hand. On the other hand, African American and Latino children shouldn't be used as the tools by which somebody learns how to not be biased anymore, so that they are the exposure that adults get so that they can overcome their implicit biases. I'll give you an example, for instance. We want to make sure that people who have gotten over their biases, and there are meaningful ways to do that, then come to the table and begin to interact. But if we have someone who holds significant bias, it affects the brain of the young person. It affects their disease rate over time when they're dealing with having to listen to microaggressions, someone who may come up to you and you're thinking to yourself, I think I'm pretty well spoken, and they're shocked that you're articulate. Little things that happen over and over again. Additionally, when we have our young children in a classroom setting, we find significant differences in their brain reactions when they're in a place where people don't believe they can do well. The part of their brain that's about how smart they are turns right on and they master topics. The part of their brain that then allows them to use that mastery on a test that's going to happen a week later literally turns off in the face of a biased instructor that's in front of them. So it's important that we don't create interaction for the sake of interaction, exposure, so to speak, for the sake of exposure at the expense of the children of color, but instead that we get an adult population that gets rid of their implicit biases and then come to the floor so that they can interact with the children in a way that's meaningful and healthy for everyone.
Yeah. Question over here.
Yes. Given the components of education and job opportunity as being key issues nationwide with African Americans and other minority groups, Father Cunningham used to always talk about thinking outside of the box. What would solve Detroit's education system problem if the education system was driven by industry, research, and development? In other words, the automotive industry, which is very prevalent here in the city of Detroit, what would happen if they received a tax break to actually take over the education system along with other industries and employ people, train them from the cradle all the way through college, have the teachers come out of the different industries and drive our schools toward job opportunities and economic progress?
Is that a solution we ought to be talking about, William?
Well, industry does have an investment to make, a much greater investment to make in terms of education, making sure that the resources are there. I'm not certain that I would ascribe to the notion that industry should come out and just drive it, because industry does have its own bias towards making a profit, towards satisfying its goals in the short term, the near term. I am much more interested in education that's going to prepare kids for the jobs that we don't even know about yet, okay? For the opportunities that we don't even know about, to take our imagination much further than it is right now. But I would also defer to educators to speak to that particular issue.
I think that education, one is to remember our Constitution provides for that our children are to be educated. It's an entitlement provision. The question is, and the challenge too often is that the politics gets in the way, that we don't have the honest discussion. And then we have another challenge, and that is, look at our geographic makeup. And when we look at our geographic makeup, we see these disparate impacts throughout southeastern Michigan. And so one of the issues might be that we have to revisit the school district concept to make it more regional so we can think more outside the box.
Yeah. I think this is going to end up being our last question, but we'll see if we can get one in after this
just
too.
a question and a quick comment. How do we change laws that are implemented that allow people to be biased? My son was walking down the street and was stopped by a police officer just for nothing in the middle of the night. And when the police aggressively stopped, and then when the police officer recognizes my son, it was a police officer that knew him. I was like, oh, hey, Carlos, man, how you doing? This and that, what you doing? Hey, man, have a safe evening. Let him go. But my son called me, was happy about the officer, seeing the officer, but then later on, my thought was, what if he wasn't an officer that knew you?
Yeah.
That's right. That is a continuous problem. There's no doubt that we have racial profiling that goes on. And that goes back to what Kimberly is talking about. We have to have some really honest dialogue. We have to move from the fact that we have these unconscious biasness and be conscious about it, and then act deliberately. And that's a long process, and it requires people like you, people like the police, sitting down in a safe space and having these conversations. What causes this police officer to do what he did?
And we have to go beyond dialogue, of course, as well. Dialogue is important. I think we all
Absolutely.
agree that that's the first step. If we stop at the talking, then nothing changes. So
That's
yes,
right.
we've got to go to laws. We've got to go to the multiple interventions that are out there that say we can change people's level of bias. But how do you get people to vote for laws like that? Well, it's back to the neuroscience. When I look at it, when you see someone who's getting hurt, you feel their pain. It's called cortical spinal inhibition. You actually have a sensation in your body, pain empathy sensation when you see someone getting hurt. When you see someone getting hurt who you don't care about or who you don't relate to, you don't have that same sensation in your body. Literally, if I show you a film of someone being poked right here with a hypodermic needle and that hand did not look as much like yours, then you would have a different level of sensation based on your level of implicit or unconscious bias. So that will vary demographic group to demographic group, how much empathy you feel for somebody else. If I don't feel empathy for your son, I'm not going to vote to enact legislation that's going to take care of your son. If I don't think that I need to be as concerned about your son as I am about the people in my home, then I'm not going to have that relationship, and I'm going to dehumanize your son, and I won't even know that I'm doing it. And I'll get to the polls, and the next thing I will say to you is, I don't have bias, I voted for President Obama. And that will be the end of the conversation.
Can I just say one thing from a Department of Civil Rights perspective? If your child gets stopped, and they shouldn't have been stopped, I want you to file a complaint.
You need to
I want you to file a complaint with the Department of Civil Rights so we can investigate.
Well, you have,
Yeah, and before you get to that point, vote, and if you can vote again, do so.
Don't tell them that.
I'm serious. No, I mean, this is very, very important. It's very important that you ask questions of people who seek to earn your trust and that seek to have you do things on their behalf. How do you feel about this, that, and the other thing? I've got 3 sons. Okay.
We gotta
Okay,
read it
sorry.
right. And this is not Chicago,
I still
so
have
only
3
vote
sons.
once. That's all the time we have tonight. But we will be visiting this issue, of course, on future episodes of American Black Journal. So be sure to watch on Sundays at 9:30 a.m. on WTVS, Detroit Public Television. Thank you to Focus Hope and to our audience tonight. We will see you next time.